Hi, and welcome to Season 2 of the Team Deakins Podcast, a collection of informal conversations between Roger and James Deakins and a guest. We never know where the conversation will take us, so listen in and see where it goes. This episode is sponsored by Aperture, a premier manufacturer of LED lighting with the industry's greatest variety of fixtures for your complete lighting needs. Aperture recently announced the new Storm family of lights. With LED white light quality that matches natural daylight and classic tungsten bulbs, plus extreme low-end dimming while maintaining color quality. Discover more about the new Storm lights and the complete Aperture lighting ecosystem at aperture.com. Today we're speaking with a costume designer. Her credits are many and include Back to the Future, Titanic, many Transformer films, and Avatar. We're pleased to welcome Deborah Scott. Deborah, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, hi.
Oh my goodness, my pleasure.
We'd love to ask you our first question, which is always, how did you get to where you are today? Is this something that you always wanted to do? Were you dressing your dolls, or did you find it after you decided to become a doctor? What was your path?
Why film?
I know, why film? I think I was set on a course early on. My father was a huge film buff. So I watched a lot of movies when I was growing up. As a small child, we would go to the drive-in of all things because we couldn't always afford the theater. So, I got immersed in a lot of Westerns. Oh boy, a lot of Westerns. So I loved that suspension of disbelief completely. I started off as a theater major in college because we didn't really have a film department then. And if there was, I wasn't really aware of it. So I thought, well, that would be, that's kind of close to it. And then I always enjoyed doing costumes for the school plays and things like that. And, I got cast in a play in 5th grade where I had to play in the Addams Family because I had the longest hair. I got to be. That was the absolutely only reason. But I loved doing it because then I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to do that costume. That's so great. So, I learned, my mother taught me to sew when I was really little, and it was always kind of a fascination with it. And I think getting the theater degree was a really good idea, but I was always entranced with film. And luckily, my path led me that way. And I was extremely fortunate to, kind of get set on that path a little early, and very grateful. Yeah.
Yeah, no, how did that happen, though? How did that come about?
Well, I think my first, what I would consider real movie, I had the luck of meeting a woman, and I did some television. Live camera, live action, 3-camera live action. So that was quite fun, and a lot like the theater, because you had stage cues and you had to do it, and that was it. It was like you either blew it or you did well. But when I was at college, I met an actor by the name of Charlie Martin Smith, and he went off right after school to do a film with Carol Ballard of Black Stallion fame, which is, a gorgeous, fantastic movie. And it was called Never Cry Wolf. And they were kind of in the middle. And I got a call one day from a stranger, like, would you like to come to Alaska and do this movie with us? And I was like, yeah. And so I had to, it was like, can you leave tomorrow? It's like, yep, sure can. So that kind of got it started. And it was such an amazing film to do. It was small crew, really small crew, where I was the one and only costume person. I would chip in and do the makeup. Once in a while when the script supervisor had to do something, I would do that. So we had, it totally ingrained in me that love of the collaboration of what it takes to do a movie.
So you did study theatrical costumes.
Yeah.
What's the difference, would you say, offhand, between designing for the theater and designing for film?
Well, it's more like what's the same, right? Because the same thing is that you're defining characters, and the characters live in a particular time, in a particular place. It's much different working in the theater because you have to consider sort of the scale and the size of it.
Right.
But and also I think the the great thing about theater is that you have more of a chance to be interpretive. You have a director, like you might do a historical piece, but it could be set in the future. So there's a lot more kind of risky chances taken. So that's kind of the best thing I think about the theater, and the fact that you have a live audience there and it's very exciting. But yeah, I think that they're very, very much the same, really.
Mm.
I'm interested, your experience on Never Cry Wolf. Do you miss that kind of filmmaking? Small crew, everybody changing, helping each other,
Yeah, I do. I mean, I try when I can to do, for lack of a better word, a low budget movie where you have less kind of resource, you have more connection between people because it is naturally smaller, way smaller than doing something like a Titanic or an Avatar where it's just like a city of people that get together to make a movie. So yeah, I try to sometimes search those out. Yeah.
What about Don't Answer the Phone? Wasn't that before Never Call
Oh yeah, I forgot about that one. Thanks for bringing that up.
That's like the first movie I did. Don't want to talk about it.
Freudian forget.
Well, I shouldn't even say that because I actually met my husband on that movie. So it was, something.
There were good things.
Something good came out of it. Something very good came out of it. So that was kind of great. But other than that, I was absolutely the one and only member of the department. And it was, the classic horror film where it was me, makeup and hair, all the actors in one little RV going from terrible location to terrible location.
Wow.
It was pretty fun. Yeah. But yeah, I did meet my husband, so that was great.
Well, it certainly is different than a lot of the movies you've done recently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to forget about that one completely.
Sorry, I shouldn't have brought it up.
That's okay. That's okay. It's actually quite funny because I have blacked it out.
Yeah.
What did you learn? What's the thing you learned in those early experiences that you took to? Was it E.T. That was the first film you were costume designer on? Or?
Well, at that time, the unions, the guilds were really tricky, so I couldn't get designer credit. So I just took, but that's okay because I wasn't a designer on the movie. That was an amazing, again, one of my absolute favorite experiences. For Stephen, he's remarkable to work with. I love him. Completely collaborative. It was a small crew for him. He had done some very big films, and it was a lot of women and young women writer, producer, myself, and we had an absolute fabulous time because that's also the intimacy of the story automatically made for, I was on the set almost all the time. It was still when we were shooting film and you could go to Daly's at lunch.
Oh yeah.
Those wonderful days. So, it was an incredible experience and really a learning lesson.
Was one of the things that you had to learn when getting into film was how different fabrics react on film? Does a silk react slightly differently when filmed than something else?
It's a really good question. And I think, in those days, film stocks were quite different one to the next and constantly changing. So, you have the expert sitting next to you, so he could speak to that more than I can. But it would make a difference, and you had to sort of have the information and sort of seek out the what the guidelines were sometimes. Maybe if you were lucky, you got to shoot some tests. And I think other than that, it was more the lighting. Which kind of lighting you might be under. Maybe you had some bad experiences where you'd use something and then you go, oof, shouldn't have used that. So it's a cumulative experience over time a little bit. But things change so rapidly. And then boom, you're into digital, which is a whole other animal. So kind of keeping up with the technology has been actually pretty fascinating.
What was it like when we went into digital for costumes? What
does
were
it
the
make it
concerns?
easier that you've got a calibrated monitor on set and everything?
Yeah.
But it's a little late on the day on the set.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, but you
Well,
have...
I was also wanted to talk about doing tests because we've always done costume and wardrobe tests, haven't we, before starting a film?
Yeah.
Along with tests with the actors. Don't you find those really important?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're so informative. And I think what you have to, by that time you sort of designed it per se. So your characters are kind of what they are by that point when you're doing tests. But you do still have the chance to sort of tweak your colors or certain things that you might, go back to, understand how it might look in certain kinds of lighting. I think it's a little limited in the lighting in tests because, I found mostly they try to make the actors look good. Sort of,
Yeah, right.
I
think as a cinematographer you do, because if you're not worked with a director before, then the tests are kind of important. You don't want to screw it up, do you?
Yeah, you don't want to screw it up, but you really don't want too many cooks in the kitchen either, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So, it's also a little bit redundant for me, I think. You try to get all that information, of course, but you're also kind of like, well, it's a little late now. We should have done this like 2 months ago.
Right. but on some films, you're doing a test and it's like you're doing actor and wardrobe and, you might go through literally 20 sweaters or jumpers or, change of costume. Or what about trying this shirt with this pair of trousers or something?
That's
and you
a nightmare.
suddenly find it. Yeah, well, that's how I'm trying to describe it. It seems like, well, don't you know what the color is by eye? Why do you need to be shooting it on film or digital? Digital is even more funny because you can see it on the monitor or you see it by eye. Why even shoot it?
Yeah,
but
anyway.
I think sometimes it's the only time that you actually get the full attention, maybe, of the director. You've talked to them before, but you've got this day where they're saying, focus on the makeup, focus on the costumes.
Yeah.
And the actors are there.
Yeah, I think that's true. But I do think like you better have made more decisions by that time. You don't want to be like trying the whole color palette, unless you're looking for something specific. But by that time, you better have decided. I'm pretty decisive like that. Like I'll be like, I'm pretty sure this is the one. And maybe have a backup. But and as far as the digital goes, yes, it does show up on the day, but you do have all that opportunity like the day before or a week before where you can run out and go, how does this look? Is this good? Or just so you could tell, as long as you're kind of in the same, again, lighting environment, it can be informative and helpful. Yeah.
And do you work closely with the production designer as they're viewing they're working on the design, because surely the color on the wall might affect what you want to put them
James
in.
is just thinking a particular instance of a woman wearing red and suddenly being put in a red room unexpectedly.
So let's just say the coat became white.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Yeah, of course you do. And I think that depending on the circumstances and how, there's a lot of personalities in the film business, and some people are more collaborative and easygoing than others. I think it's one of the things that you learn as you go along, not to be kind of easily shaken or threatened by someone else, like, made too nervous. Like you still have your place at the table. So as you gain that experience, you're more able, I think, to express yourself and share your opinions with others. And sometimes I've had situations where you want things to match, right? You want the coat to match the wall. That's a big decision. That involves a lot of people. And you usually know that before you get there, fingers crossed, right?
Well, when you decide to do a film, what's the first thing that you do? I guess probably sit down with the director, but what's your process?
I mean, hopefully, yes, the director, number one, absolutely. I've done movies, I've accepted movies before that I haven't read the script because of my either relationship with the director or just like complete blind faith that there's no way that person is going to make a bad movie, right? So, but you usually, of course, read the script and then get involved very much with the characters and how the characters help develop the narrative. And then how my work on top of that will help develop the narrative. And then it's just a real slow process of, breakdown and how many costumes and, what period you're shooting in, contemporary, is it fantasy, is it sci-fi, is it the past, so it's just a lot of, and then I think I do a tremendous amount of research. I think most costume designers do, and I think a lot of production designers too. So I research like crazy. I try to really delve into that for at least a few weeks, maybe even before I start, just to get a real feeling of what my visual might be.
Can you talk a bit more about that? I mean, I'm just noticing on your CV here, you did, say, Twilight Zone, the movie, and Back to the Future, and then you did Hoffa and Legends of the Fall, and then Heat. I mean, what is the difference in the process then between doing a kind of futuristic science fiction, science fantasy film and something like Hoffa or Legends of the Fall, which is kind of much more based
realistic
in a reality?
Yeah. I mean, the history of something is super important. So if you're in a period film and your location, Legends of the Fall, Montana, what years it went through a bunch of years. So I think doing a period film is actually, I love it. And it's also because you have such a guideline. And especially when you're into periods where there's photography, there's still photography. So you can look at photographers that shot real people on the street or real people on the farm or, so all those kinds of things would give you this incredible historical template. There's books written, there's costume books that you can go back to. So you have a real straight path. And then it just depends then if the production designer, the director, if you're going to stay on that path or kind of veer off from it. I think fantasy and sci-fi is actually, to me, the hardest. It's not my favorite, and I've done a lot of it, but and I think it's because it's like, it's so wide open that you really have to have a lot of collaboration, which sometimes you don't always get. And you really have to sort of chart a course that you're not really sure if it's going to work, right? Will it be evocative? Will it just look stupid? So it's a little scary out there in the sci-fi world.
Also, is there a push in the sci-fi world? I mean, a lot of it's science fantasy, let's face it, rather than science fiction. Anyway, but is there a sort of like pressure to always kind of make things different, do something that's not been done before?
Yes.
For the sake of doing something different, really,
Really, and it's impossible. I think it's almost impossible to do that. If I could.
Yeah, really.
And I remember once on Back to the Future when we got to the part where Chris Lloyd comes back from the future. And it was a really big deal. Like, I mean, he ends up in this, the costume's ridiculous when you look at it now. I mean, it's like, I don't even know how I thought of it. But, there was so much pressure on that moment. It was just an intense amount of pressure for weeks. And the writer and the, director, Bob Zemeckis, and everybody was just like wringing their hands like, oh my God. And like, one day he finally says to me, like, what do people really wear in the future? And I'm like,
how do you know?
If I knew that, I would have a whole different career. So, it's like, but that's how you feel underneath it all. You really want to know, like you really want to feel it somehow, like some divine intervention or something to tell you which direction to take.
Yeah.
I would think also it's kind of important if you're doing some sort of sci-fi to know what the rules of that world is. For instance, when we before we started Blade Runner, we sat down and said, what is this world? Do they have newspapers? Do they, so you get a feel of it, because if you're going back to 1950, you know what the rules are of that world. But science fiction, if you're going by one rule and the production designers are going by a different rule, it could be really interesting.
Yeah, it could really fall apart for sure. I think one of the best experiences I had in that way was with Minority Report, because Stephen had also done a lot of research himself and talked to a lot of experts about, highly technical things that I way over my head. But, so there was kind of there was more knowledge perhaps around just the concept of the future. And, he was so good at bringing people together and really having those discussions. So you could make those rules and make those boundaries and kind of line it all up. And then I guess you come up with situations where you're like, oh, do I get to break the rule here, or should I stick to it? It's like, then you just have to really, you have to discipline yourself.
Do you read a lot of science fiction?
No, not at all.
That was funny. I was just reading a book the other day about Leo Szilard, who invented basically the atom bomb. He got his inspiration from reading H.G. Wells. Anyway, I digress. But
do you read a lot of science fiction? Can you tell?
I used to more than I do now. Now I read a lot of physics and
oh my goodness.
Yeah, and astronomy and stuff.
Well, that's impressive.
But that's
impressive.
By the point. When you were saying in relationship to doing, science fiction, but also in relationship to doing Hoffa or Legends of the Fall, that sometimes you and the director might decide to veer off from reality or from one direction
or one period.
Yeah, what informs that choice, really?
I would say on Legends of the Fall, there was an instance, it was led by character. So Ed Zwick had an idea of how the character was going to go, and she ended up wearing pants, which really hard to swallow that. That was kind of like, oh, are you sure? It's like, so we had a little back and forth about it, and it wasn't my first choice at all, but it was something that he really wanted. And when I thought about it, I said, you're right. This is going to describe her character better than anything else I could do. And so be it, and then you kind of embrace that and move forward. But it was an excellent choice, I think, in hindsight. It was difficult for me at the time, but that's only because of those rules, darn it.
Yeah.
But if the director can't break the rule, nobody can. So
right.
And you get into the script and the characters and you start designing all the different costumes, but then the actors come in. And the actors obviously have thoughts and ideas of what their character is. And also sometimes we've found that they find part of their character in the costumes.
Yes.
When they're
sometimes see an actor walking around the costume department and going, that works, or something. It's kind of interesting process. They all have such different processes, don't they?
So what is the process with the actor?
Well, I think, like Roger says, they're all different. They're unique. They're unique individuals, and I think mostly what they bring in is a more cerebral vision of the character. So they'll want to talk. I found it's a complete mix. I've had actors walk in and be absolutely clueless about what they might want to wear. They haven't thought about it.
Right.
They don't, and then they get to see what I've brought to the party, and they go, wow, that's amazing. Right? Or, not so sure, but, and then you have a dialogue about it. And other people, I've rarely found the person that has come in so set in their ways. I can't think of a time that happened. I can think of times that happened where a director has sent me into a fitting room to an actor and saying, she will wear this.
That must be an awkward one.
I had to do that with, when I worked with Albert Brooks on Defending Your Life, which was, that was a pretty high concept film, and it really holds up. It's brilliant. But when we got to, he had hired Shirley MacLaine, Shirley MacLaine, oh my God, and he had picked, he goes, what's she going to wear? And I'm like, and I had showed him some things, and he picked, that's it. That's what she's going to wear. And I'm like, okay. So, it was Shirley MacLaine. Shirley MacLaine had worked with every famous costume designer in the world. She obviously has a gigantic vision, her own self. And I walked in with like a hanger. Miss MacLaine, it was like, it was so, it was the scariest moment of my life. She was really intimidating at first, and then we just kind of sat down. And then I think that's when, you need a little armchair psychology. You need a little bit of that psychologist in you to sort of find your way to talk to the person and make the two people meet in the middle. Like, so Shirley's idea, which was,
right.
Shirley wanted to wear purple and Albert wouldn't have it, but I didn't have a chance to go back to Albert because she was working the next day. So it was like, she was going to wear that costume. So it was fun, and it was fun.
Wow.
And it taught me a lot, like just getting over the nerves of it.
Yeah.
So she was amazing. She was amazing.
But you also did Who's That Girl, right? And that's Madonna, who must have been fairly specific about what she would or would not wear. And is very different in what she wears.
She's incredible. I think the most impressive thing about her, I honestly can't tell you how we very much collaborated. She had just come, she was Madonna at that point, like really first glimpse of what kind of, character that she was going to be in real life. So, and incredibly professional, unbelievable, never late, always knew her lines, just spot on all the time. And so we had a quite a great collaboration, sort of coming up with fun things. And then she kind of set me loose. It was like once she, we kind of got to know each other a little bit, and then I could just do pretty wacky stuff. There's some pretty crazy stuff in that movie, admittedly, costume-wise. It's like, why? But it kind of didn't matter because we didn't have rules. She did not have rules. It was great. So,
great.
Yes, but the great thing about her was that we would go in to try on, I would say, oh, I picked some earrings for that particular costume. And she would go, great. And she would try on the entire thing, head to toe, to decide on the earrings.
Wow.
So, talk about a complete picture and a vision. And you can see it through her career. She, masterful. Absolutely.
And what we find is during the shoot, oftentimes the film changes a little bit because as you're actually shooting with the actor, they bring something to it, and the character sometimes will change a little bit, and we see it in a different way. Has that ever happened to you that mid-shoot you go, well, actually that character would probably be better off in this later scene in something different?
Yeah, I think you have to be ready for that. You have to pay close attention. Because you're going to get clues all along the way in terms of the storytelling and in terms of the actor's performance. The tricky thing is not shooting in continuity. So,
that's really
right. So sometimes you've jumped into something, and you kind of wish it's more like you wish things that you hadn't done, or that you could change later. Which I'm kind of wondering too with you, Roger. Like, I'm sure you've shot things where you've gone back and said, "Oh, I wish I could have or should have."
Every shot I've ever done. No, but then sometimes you do shoot in continuity, don't you? Which is kind of interesting. But then, that gives a whole other set of problems to certainly a cinematographer and their crew, because then you're going back to the same location maybe 3 or 4 times during a shoot, and you've got to relight it 3 or 4 times, which is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, that's
expensive,
tricky.
if not ridiculous, you know.
Did you shoot Did you shoot in continuity?
Sorry?
Did you shoot in continuity on 1917?
Quite a bit. I mean,
Pretty
we were
much,
forced
yeah.
out of it with a couple of the locations where we had to travel and when they were available. But quite a bit of it was in continuity. It had to be, really.
Yeah, that whole continuous take thing, it made it so much easier because if you had just done it yesterday, you would remember where the tail was and where the beginning was.
Because it really did have to match from, you know, end of one shot to the next. But, I mean, that's kind of interesting because that film was probably the most highly prepped film that we've been on.
Yeah.
Where you wouldn't change. You couldn't, like you're saying, you couldn't even change the costume. You couldn't change the makeup because going from one to another, it wouldn't have worked.
And what was fantastic is we were working out how we were going to shoot it, and we sort of had it laid out, and we started shooting in the beginning of April, but in November we were having production meetings, and costumes were in those meetings, and props, and all these people that you oftentimes don't see till much further down the line.
Yeah.
So it meant that everybody could say, well, wait, this doesn't really work for my department so well, or whatever, or the mud's going to fall off, or whatever.
Yeah, that's nice. Did you have, I mean, I think what's really impressive about that film is that the lighting. It's like, how did you get it to be overcast the entire time?
We prayed a lot. No.
Yeah, I'm not very religious, but no, we waited. I mean, we didn't, on the first day of the schedule, we didn't shoot at all.
Yeah,
which was a bit of a shock to the studio. You know, and there was some talk in production, why don't we silk the whole trench line? I said,
gosh.
but it's like 100 yards long. But, you know, I mean, it's like sometimes when production worry, they don't see the practical reality. They just want, you know.
Yeah. But the other thing,
the
other thing too is the takes were so long that if we had done 2 setups a day, we've done a lot of the script.
Absolutely.
So we spent a lot of time sitting around watching the sky, and we couldn't go pee because that was 5 miles out because it couldn't be in the shot. So it was an interesting shoot.
Yeah,
but
challenging.
I want to ask you, how often and what do you do? Does it happen that you're in the middle of a shoot? Are you usually on the set, for one?
Yeah.
And then secondly, has it happened that a costume or something, an actor doesn't feel comfortable within the shoot and you have to make a rapid shift? Does that happen often or at all to you?
Oof. Well, you really hope it doesn't happen. Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Sure, yeah.
I think I'm quite often on the set. I'm almost always on the set with anything new, anything, even background, whatever, you know, to like, because that's your time to sort of sculpt it a little bit. Like you can look at everybody together and maybe you want to like change a tie or, you know, something doesn't look right in combination with the other thing. And I find that it's not really one thing. It's not really one image, right? It's a collection of images together that make the picture. So I always think of it kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. So I always try as best as I can to be there. There have been times, yeah, sure, things change, right? Where there's just, and directors are all different that way. They work their process very differently. Michael Mann, who, brilliant, you know, I mean, he's another, amazing film. I'm really lucky to have worked on it. Very demanding, very particular about his costumes and his set and the lighting and everything about it. I mean, you know, the angle, and sometimes we would wait for a decision and sometimes it would be a costume thing, or sometimes he would, you know, tricky, maybe possibly use a costume as an excuse to just have a minute. But sometimes it's lighting, you know, sometimes you're like, oh, should it be, and maybe you have an option, like, does it look better? Like you said, like, is it a red coat or a white coat? Very different. So maybe everybody together wants to paint that picture. And Michael is very, very adept at that. So He does a tremendous amount of prep. He picks things very specifically, and you can rely that things might change on the day. So
that means you have to have options ready, right?
Yeah. Well, unless it's continuity, and even sometimes then.
Been there.
Yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah.
Like, well, it doesn't match, and they're like, don't care. Okay.
Joel and Ethan Cohen used to say quite often, matching's for sissies.
I love
And
that.
it was funny how often if something didn't work quite so good for a shot, but you were trying to match to something else, continuity, they would say, don't worry about it, it's for sissies. And there's a couple of things that I won't quote here that would changes within a scene that nobody's ever picked up.
Right. That's the thing. That's the thing. I think we can't obsess over it because it's a huge part of our job, in costumes to have good continuity. But, there are the thing where no one notices, it's true. Sometimes people don't notice. So you'll notice every time you see the movie. Yeah. You'll go,
I worked on a film one time where they literally within a scene used a cut from another scene where she literally was in a different dress. And nobody ever picked that up.
Right.
And it killed me. I mean, I hated it.
Well, of course, now you could change it on the computer.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah, that's right. Editing can really mess you up.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And you were so perfect. You shot everything so perfectly. And then it comes out that way.
Yeah.
How do you work on films like, you've done so many sort of science fiction, whatever films, Transformers and that. How do you work in relationship with what's going to be done in post, especially as more and more seems to be done in post?
Avatar is the quintessential,
right.
Right? So basically post becomes part of your shooting. It becomes part of the filmmaking. And, in these films, it's so much done in the virtual world. It's a huge different way of working for me, a huge bank of knowledge that I had to gain to even be able to converse in it, with VFX people, and way over my pay grade at the beginning. And I feel like I'm an expert at it now. I might be one of the only costume designers who's done it as thoroughly as we've done in these movies. And that's really because of our producer, John Landau, who sadly is no longer with us. And Jim, really wanting perfection in that zone, in that area. So I've stayed on very far into post-production, which is pretty unusual for a costume designer. And what I say to everyone, it's like, because we make all those costumes in real life, we make them in real life, really hard to make. And then I remake them in the virtual world, really hard to do too. So, it's really hard. And when you're working with different kinds of artists in the virtual world, so you're talking in different vocabulary, and, so you get in kind of this weird virtual fitting room where you're like, could you make it longer, wider, so that you're sculpting this in a completely weird space, because you can't put your hands on it. You can't move it around.
Right.
So it's tricky. And sometimes when you're describing the way something might move, the weight of something, how it would react to an actor's movement or the wind, or that you have to sort of describe it in words.
Right. Because when you're designing it with them in your head, you know what the material is, supposedly. So well, since this is silk, it wouldn't do this, but it would do that.
Right. And and since they reap the benefit of our making the pieces, because we hand them over to the virtual effects people, and the artists get to hold them, move them around, try to gain an understanding through their hands and their eyes of the work that we've done. So it's pretty extensive. And luckily, you have the budget to do it that way.
Yeah.
But do they not, do you make them physically? Does the effects then not scan them?
Yeah.
I don't understand why they can't just sort of take the material and then scan it in different situations, like whether it's wet or whether the wind's blowing, or and then have a whole virtual costume.
Yeah, I guess they could do that. I think
Maybe next week.
Yeah, I think it gets down to actually time and money.
Right.
We do a lot of that. Like I'll make a version of the garment that we put in a swimming pool, so you can see how it moves underwater. There's so much underwater in the second, the way of water. So we did extensive tests with that, and because Jim's really a stickler for science and what would really happen and that kind of thing. I think that the danger is, those computer programs can only keep up with reality so well. They're the evil of the algorithm, in my opinion, where the simulation, the simulation tells you what to do. So they have to be constantly rewriting these programs, which is why I think it's such intellectual property for them. That they're constantly working on that to make it as real as it can be. But sometimes they're just not quite there.
Right. Or maybe it's not what you want just creatively, because I remember I've said before that we were working at DreamWorks Animation, and they got the animators and lighters had got to a point they could go out and scan the light in a forest and then put it on their scene, which was set in a forest. So the lighting was absolutely real, but it looked awful.
Yeah. Well,
because creatively it didn't really make it didn't really have anything. It was just kind of flat and dull. It was uninteresting.
I think the lighting is tricky, and I would always say, like, I don't understand why. I mean, they're very confident that their lighting. They show you lighting slices, right? Here's studio lighting. Here's sunny. Here's blue lighting. Here's firelight, or whatever it might be, right? They mock up all these things, and you're like, nah, I'm not buying that. Because, I mean, it might look like firelight, but to me, what it's doing to the clothes isn't what would happen in real life. But they would literally have to test every single situation. And to me, because I'm like, that's not right. That you can't tell me that looks like, even if it was something like blue jeans, right? Blue jeans, they look a certain way no matter how you shoot them. We're always getting in these like very friendly fights over these issues. So I'm sure that having a costume designer in the mix is the bane of their existence sometimes, but we have a good time.
So do you like doing things with a lot of CGI in it that causes you to do this?
I have loved doing these movies. It's super challenging. I would not want to do this for the rest of my career. No. No. I'm really dying to get my hands back on some like real garments, or even just go shopping. I'm going to go to the Avatar shopping, center and pick out a few things.
Yeah, really. You said you grew up watching Westerns. I noticed you haven't really done any Westerns apart from maybe if you call Legends of a Fall a Western, but that's a bit of a stretch. So why not? How do you choose what you do? And why no Westerns?
Well, I did one Western with David Von Anken. What was it called? Oh my gosh, I can't even think of the name of it now. But Liam Neeson was in it and Pierce Brosnan. It was pretty wonderful. Small film, really challenging. That's a good question. I mean, the way you how do you choose things? I choose things by kind of feel. Like, does it speak to you? Do you feel like you have something to offer? Do you love the director? Do you think you have a good working relationship? And do you think that you could make that story come alive? So sometimes I read things that I'm like, I'm sure this is going to be very popular, but it's just not doing it for me. Or other times I'll read things that you're like, I'm sure we'll be lucky if this movie gets financing, but this could be wonderful. So
Yeah.
It's, the
Yeah.
film business is so tricky that way. It's not fair, really. There's no kind of equal playing ground.
Yeah. And you look at a script and you may say this could be great, but it all depends on how it gets made. Because you can take a great script and make a bad movie.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're all at the, I guess, at the mercy of the final product in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So, and what's the have you got a regular crew you work with, a regular team, and how do you sort of go about choosing that crew?
I try to work with the same people. I have a long career. Some people have retired, sadly. I don't know why. It's like there's no retirement in show business. But, so the people you just find through over time, and I'm sure you've had the same thing, like sometimes collaborations are just for life. You know that person and you are going to see eye to eye, that they're going to bring something to the party too. They're going to help you in the times when you need help. They're going to listen to you kind of talk about it for ad infinitum when, it's like, okay, enough now. But, if you're lucky, you try to collect people as you go along that you form a little tribe that think alike and work hard. I'm a hard worker myself, and I absolutely demand it of the people that work for me. It's like no one gets to be lazy. Everybody has to care. I don't care if we're talking about a button or a huge ball gown. It's like you care about everything you do. And those passionate kind of people are wonderful. They're just wonderful. And they're so talented. I mean, I've been just benefited so much through my career of people's talents. It's remarkable. It's remarkable that people are out there that have immense talent with their hands, especially in my part of the world, that they can make things and create things that I could never do myself. They can also take guidance. So it's pretty amazing. I mean, people are amazingly talented people. There's so many people out there that are so talented and can bring so much and make every movie better for, I get to stand there with my name on it, but it's really absolutely a village of people.
I want to ask you how we talk about technology and the number of films you've done that have got that much in that is done digitally. How does that affect you in terms of designing and producing costumes and jewelry? I mean, how much do you use AI at all at the moment, and do you use 3D printing?
I have not used AI, but I have used 3D printing.
Yeah. For what kind of things?
Well, early on in Avatar, when we're trying to create something that was kind of otherworldly, especially, and we used a lot of 3D printing to make things that weren't otherworldly. You could make a helmet, for example, a lot easier 3D printing it sometimes than actually making it. So you had the advantage of being able to sort of sculpt things and make things in a different way that if you had to buy every component and build it yourself. So it can be really handy that way. I think in the fantasy world of Avatar, it was a combination of incredibly hands-on natural things and this ability to use 3D printing to make whatever you wanted. And combined together, it becomes a beautiful, you end up having a beautiful result. But putting a 3D printed shell, for instance, next to a real shell wins every time. Because nature is just much more interesting, much more complex, much more beautiful, intricate than anything, I think, that can be made from a computer. I'm sure, rocket scientists don't think that, but, artists probably do to some extent. Yeah.
I had just a silly question, but I always wondered I notice when there's a scene when there's two people that they're generally when I've noticed, dressed in complementary colors like blue and red, or that. And I wondered, is that ever anything that you think about, that there's two people in the scene and you want them to go together? In other words, not two green dresses, even though they're different greens.
Such a good question. I mean, that's really complex, because two people in a scene is really different than multiple people in a scene.
Yeah.
I think also texture has a lot to do with it, not just color.
Mm-hmm.
Color tends to, you might have a reason to put both people in green, but you might have a reason to make them complete opposite to each other. So the first guideline is, what would the character do? And the second guideline is, how do you make those two characters work together in the scene visually? So unless you have I've never thought about it in that kind of nature, to be so scientific about it, instead of, directly opposites, or maybe that's the way our natural eye tends to work. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, it's a really interesting question, but I think that's not the first thing I think of. It would maybe be the last thing.
So would you go through and sort of think what their costume should be, and then sort of do another pass about, okay, so I'm thinking of these costumes for these people, and when are they together, and do they work together? I mean, is that a concern
100%
about when they're together?
Yeah, 100%, because I think it can be either great for the visual or very disturbing to the visual, right? So you have to be you're very wary of it. And I think those color passes, and sometimes movies that have sort of a very overall tight, I think Revolutionary Road actually had a very, very controlled color palette. Am I wrong about that? Am I right about that?
No, you're right about that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you're working with maybe, a smaller palette, meaning you're going to have things that match more, for lack of a better word. But I think that if you don't have, I usually have an overall palette that I like, and then the rules come in, and then people's opinions come in, and you slowly start to sculpt it. And sometimes you follow a character through a color palette, and sometimes you follow the whole clan of people through a color, but it's something you're very, very much aware of. And sometimes, you just really, hate to say it, blow it, where you're sort of like, oh my God, now I'm in a scene, and they are both wearing green plaid. Oh, darn. But the circumstances that have led you to that moment were maybe not ideal. So
yeah. When you go and watch a movie, does it ever take you out of the movie by looking at the costumes that you see something that really annoys you? And what would that be?
Oh, I hate to say it, yes.
Well, I mean,
it's
I do. I have to admit, if I'm seeing a movie that, I have to sort of not like it too much, and then I study the photography and then criticize it in my own head. And if the film's really bad and the photography is really bad, I start looking at the grain structure. But I don't do that anymore because it's digital. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
You're right, you can't do that anymore.
What upsets you? Yeah.
What's worse is sitting next to another costume designer or cinematographer, and then you're in trouble because you're like, look at that one. I mean, sadly, yes. I mean, I try as much as I can. I mean, I think if a movie really grabs me sort of overall, if it has a style, or if it has it's just something about it that would just draw you in, that you're automatically going to like all the departments better. And maybe that's just because they work together better. Yeah. It's really, really hard to say. Yeah. But sometimes I think the thing that takes me out of it the most is if it seems like a character faux pas. Like, I'm sorry, that person would never wear that. It's like, right. Or sometimes if you can tell that something is too new And I know
Yes,
that's
yes,
right.
that's mine. Yeah.
Yeah. Where you're like, and then I always think like, oh, well, maybe it was a bad day on the set and they had to run out that morning and it was 2 now. I mean, it just was.
Yeah. But isn't there a price tag on the boot in Fargo?
Yeah, there's price tag on the boot in Fargo, but it really worked because we didn't see it until we shot the wide shot. And then the boys said, that's funny. The crew were laughing and the boys said, oh, that's funny. Let's leave it in for the closer shot. But sometimes things work.
Yeah.
But,
oh, that's cute. That's funny.
What makes you decide on a show whether to actually sew the costumes or shop the costumes? How do you make that decision?
Well, I'm not a designer who is like, I have to make everything. That's not my thing at all. I don't think that I have to have complete control over every last stitch by any means. And sometimes it's really decided on, sadly, and a contemporary thing is absolutely decided by your budget. Because it's, you're going to absolutely have to shop that show. You're not going to have any money to make anything. So it's determined sometimes like that. I've done period shows before where I couldn't afford really, again, budget-wise. And so I chose instead to have every single piece vintage, like actual real vintage. So then you're like, okay, well, that's real. It was really fun. It was a real challenge to do, and it was super fun. And it lent.
Did anybody get shot or fall in the water and you only had one?
No, thank goodness. Yeah. So, but I think I like to mix it up whenever I can. And I think that's partly like if I do even on a film like E.T., I would think, okay, I was too young to have kids then, but I mean, I could have, but I was too young. I did not have my children then. But I would think like, okay, I'm a mom. I'm going to go shop for these two. These kids didn't shop for themselves, right? Their mom bought the clothes.
Right.
Right.
Right. So that's my mindset. So I go out and I say like, and the little girl was way easier because she's only this old. I can control her as the mom. I'm going to pick out her outfit and she's going to wear it. So, and then as the boys got older, they get looser and less, less able to control. So it's kind of that kind of thing. Like I put myself in the time and place of that person and try to behave accordingly, so it's a little bit of acting on my side hustle, but yeah.
Right.
So on something like Titanic, did you sew those or did you go and look for vintage?
We did
because there was a lot of water in that.
Too much. There was a lot of water. Yeah, we did both. We had a nice long prep on that film. And great wisdom from John Lando again. And he allowed me to basically shop pretty much around the world. It was more difficult then because, of course, we did not have the internet the way we have now. So you couldn't just Google, like, who sells, So you had to search it out. So, but it was amazing to look at real garments from the period. They were so informative. They were so beautifully crafted. Way more complicated than probably we could have ever done. And things like hats, were like whole birds on hats and really difficult that I felt lent an authenticity to the film. And then the hardest part about that was the things that I did make to try to make them as good as the real thing. So I set that bar for myself. And, it was hard work. And I had, again, a village of people with incredible skills. So, but those two things together, I think, were the best part of the movie.
To James's point, though, that when there was so much water, I presume you had to make costumes and hats for the scenes where the hats were going to get destroyed, or I hope you didn't destroy a whole load of old hats from the costume shop.
We had one unfortunate occurrence where the ADs did not plan accordingly and dumped a few people in the water. But that's going to happen. That's bound to happen. A little disregard for the costume department. But yeah, we were lucky because again, not that we filmed everything in continuity, but because the ship had to go down at a point, the sets had to get destroyed, right? So that was at the very end of the schedule. So we spent months with a huge crew of people just like churning out, like, okay, what saved by the life preservers because they covered up so much of a garment, right? But like just making like hundreds of skirts and pants and shirts and just churning the stuff out that they weren't as quality, of course, but they worked fine. So just in preparation for people to be floating around in freezing cold water with wetsuits on, you know, so yeah, it was kind of a big deal, but it grew as all films do, right? They were like, oh, we're only going to have 70 people in the water. Oh, we're only going to have 700 people in the water. Oh, we're only going to have 7,000 people in the water.
A few loose knots. Was that the hardest challenge you've done on a film, or what was the hardest challenge?
That was pretty hard. Yeah. I mean, there's so many challenges along the way. I mean, it could be the smallest little thing, right? That just something that is a challenge, just find the right tie. Like, oh my gosh, I just have, you know, you're never quite satisfied. But the big things like that, things on that scale, the size of it, the amount of extras we had to dress. It was, you know, by the time we got done, I think we had dressed, if you counted them all up, 35,000 people.
What?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Wow. Wow. Oh
so,
my God.
You dress a whole bunch, then you dress a whole bunch more, then you break everything down and dress a whole bunch more. So it was we had created a small village of people.
Wow.
So
does that leave you? Does that leave you hoping for CGI? You know.
Oh boy, yeah. There wasn't that much CGI on that. I have a funny little cinematography story for you though, because we had one. They were trying to do a little forced perspective down the bow of the ship, right? And they wanted to, and he needed to have, you know, the captain of the ship down there at the end to make it work. Reverse engineering it, the person needed to be about the size of a 2-year-old. So for a couple minutes, they thought it was a really good idea to make a little 2-year-old a costume that looked a lot like the captain of the ship. And then get him all dressed up. Maybe he was 3, but get him all dressed up and like, I'm sorry, he walked like a toddler, so it didn't really work. So
that's funny.
So I think that had to be a big CG shot eventually. But it was so funny to get around to like the amount of brains around like is, you know, clearly this isn't going to work. It was pretty fun. Yeah. So, you know, the goofy stuff that happens is pretty it's pretty fun.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And it always seems funnier afterwards anyway.
Yeah.
You know, when you're going through it, sometimes it doesn't seem so funny.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm like, why am I wasting my time making a captain's uniform for this? Okay.
It's his next Halloween costume.
Yeah, I think I probably had better things to do, better things to do than that. But it was funny. It was ultimately funny. Yeah. Hindsight's great on a movie.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? Thankfully.
Yeah. That's what keeps you going.
Go on, sorry. Go on.
I was just going to ask what your advice would be to someone who's starting out now.
Oof, man. Well, it's a
and on that, I was just thinking about the same thing. What would you have done if you hadn't become a costume designer? If you hadn't have, you know, come into film industry?
Become a dentist, maybe?
I mean, no. It's interesting. I find it interesting. What would you have done, and what would you recommend, as James says, for somebody starting out? Should they get into the film industry?
Run.
If there was a film industry, you know, I think. I mean, I think it's, you know, I mean, it's so slow right now. It's kind of a scary time. Even people coming that I've had coworkers come from New Zealand who really want to work in the film business, and you just have to wish them luck. I mean, the projects are fewer and farther between right now. And we have to, and I would just say, just hold on. It's going to be fine. It all picks back up. All this stuff goes in cycles, right? I think I would say to people, like, first of all, obviously everyone says the same thing I would say, which is you have to work really hard. It's like, you're going to work harder than you ever thought you were going to. You work a lot of hours every day. But I think the thing I found really helpful, even in my own career at the time, was diversifying. So that you weren't just, because I did, especially around Titanic, I did a lot of big period films, and people are like, we don't want to hire her. She's too big budget. She only does big projects. So I said, okay, enough of this. And I went specifically and chose small and really pursued doing a small, low budget films. Because, and I have a lot of genres under my belt. And I think that's, the diversity that you can create can help you sustain your career for sure. So, anything and everything that you can do is important, especially for people just starting. Know that you're probably not going to feel well compensated, and costume designers, it takes a long time to gain respect of other crew members. It really just does. So I think those things, and I think now, I mean, there's so much more opportunity with television and, really good work and really interesting projects being done that way. So it's not, for me, it's really film, it's big screen. Which is disappearing. And it might be disappointing that you make a movie for a gigantic, you really want people to go see it in IMAX, but they're watching it on their phone. But, if they can get something out of it, I guess that's okay. So, but if I had to, I don't know, if I had to do something else, I'm not a very talented, I have no skills other than what I do. But I think if I had, you mean something that would be near and dear to my heart, I'd want to maybe help birth babies.
Okay, that's a different answer.
Yeah, that's definitely different.
I'm pretty sure I have no skill at, but, if I had to start
you
over,
could learn.
I could learn.
And how, you've been so prolific and done so many movies, how do you balance a family life and work?
Well,
how do you do, and you have children, right?
I do. I have two grown daughters, and I have a little grandson now who lives with me. So that's exciting. That is, that's actually the question I get asked most when I talk to students. So many women out there trying to pursue careers in the film business or as costume designers in the theater, in television, whatever it is, and are really torn. They're really, really torn. And they don't have, even I didn't have that many role models of working moms doing what I do. So that literally is the top of the list of almost every class I've ever been in. How do you do this? How do you make it work? And, fingers crossed, I guess, but it's like my husband works in the film business. He's a cinematographer. So, we had the same aspirations. I think that's really important, that you have common goals with your partner. And we were willing to sacrifice for each other. So if he went on location, I stayed home. I went on location, he stayed home. And I was never away from my kids for more than a couple of weeks at a time, ever. So you make a lot of sacrifices, and it's absolutely worth it. And other than that, I think it's dumb luck, right? Somehow we managed to make it work. So, and I'm super grateful for it, for sure. But I do feel for people out there, because it's scary. And I even I remember when I was first pregnant and I got let go, in quotations, from a film I was working on. I wasn't the designer, but it was one of my only jobs as a supervisor that I ever took. And it was when I became visibly pregnant in those years, it was not an okay thing. So time, if I had knew then what I know now, I would have probably sued them, but that wasn't a thing then, right? You just kind of quietly went away. But I think those things are helping. I've had people come up to me, they're like, oh my God, you were the only person that would hire me when I was pregnant. I'm so grateful to you.
Yeah.
So I think encouraging that's a huge part of the outreach I try to do with other coworkers, working moms, give them the license, like, oh my God, your kid's school plays today? Please, it's okay. You don't have to be here. We'll fill in for you, and to, especially with females, I don't have that, costumes there aren't a lot of men in it. Proportionally, it's much more women. So there's a lot of opportunity to help other young working mothers as you go along, and kind of fun. I've had women come to me in the middle of a production where it was just like super intense and a lot, like just every minute was hell. And like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to be late because I have a doctor's appointment. It's like, oh, why? Oh, I'm pregnant. It's like, and then in your mind you're going, drat, and then you're going, that's great.
Yeah.
But learning to just embrace those things. And when my grandson was born, my daughter was working as my assistant at the time. And I look around the office and everybody was bringing their dogs to work, right? It was like, dogs are in the, I'm like, why not a baby? So
Yeah.
we didn't ask permission. I didn't ask permission. I set up a little crib in the corner of the office and he came to work. And it was an absolute, I found like people from all over all the departments, especially women, would come down like, can I hold him for a few minutes? It was like the best therapy, It was it would just like everyone gets stressed out, pick up the baby and just pat him for a couple of minutes. Their blood pressure would go right down.
That's great.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Suddenly a little attachment to the real world instead of fantasy of filmmaking. That's great.
It sort of took the edge off, and I think it's like you realize what's really important. And, I credit myself with, he's a very good artist. And not that I'm a good artist, but he would often sit on my lap growing up and I always sketch with a pencil. And a pencil is his go-to. And when he first went to school, too bad I only have one. I could lavish all this attention on others. But when he first went to school, his teachers were like, how in the world is he holding it? Because kids usually hold crayons in strange ways or with a fist, but he would hold it. He'd hold like an absolute adult, and they'd be like, "That's amazing!" And I'm like, "Oh, thank you." If there's one thing I can give him, I taught him how to hold a pencil.
Early on.
Early on, he was a genius at holding pencils. That's pretty funny.
Well, thank you for doing this.
It's been really interesting and wonderful conversation. Thank you. I don't know what else I don't know what we've missed or what we could have talked about, but it's been really good.
If you'd like to sponsor the Team Deakins podcast, let us know at pod@teamdeakins.com. Thanks for listening. If you want more information and further discussion, check out the forums at www.rogerdeakins.com. Becoming a member is free, and you can ask follow-up questions there. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more new questions and topics. Also, check us out on Instagram at team.deakins. See you next time.